What's up, everyone? Welcome to the On It Total Human Optimization Podcast. Here with my man, John Dudley. And I have to say, this is an interesting day for me because this is the day that Whitney is having her boxing debut against a 6-fight veteran.
Yep.
And it's pretty crazy.
It's very crazy. Well, it's hard to think that she's going to put on a fight face.
Right, because you've been around her and you've seen her in her normal...
I mean, yesterday when we were all shooting, she came home. It's like, okay, you don't look like you're ready to throw down tomorrow.
Yeah, she's a sweetie. That's her true nature.
Yeah.
But
so
she's got the fierce lioness side too.
I think that's how I would be. I mean, I would rather just like slap hands and do something like that and kind of, figure something out. I'm not into I don't think I could put on that killer edge game face, but her opponent sure did. The pre-fight photo last night pretty much showed the true polar opposites of their attitude.
Yeah, no doubt.
I mean, one had fight face and one had
a smile.
Yeah, Miss USA or whatever.
We were talking about that earlier, but it's that feeling of really being confident. Whitney's smiling because she's put in the work, she's done the rounds, and she feels like she's holding the cards. She's playing poker with what they call the nuts, which is the best hand available.
Yeah.
She's got the full house, and she's looking at River and believing in her heart that River's got a measly pair of threes or something that she's trying to limp in with.
I can relate to that because as an athlete, when I competed, a lot of people have different ways mentally to try to, sometimes people who put on that face, they're doing it as a hope to derail someone that they see as being confident. I never really had to put on that angry face, and if I ever did, it was because I was upset with myself. Like if I was underperforming or I know I wasn't shooting at the level that I expected of myself, that's when I would have that face and people would be like, what are you so mad about? And I'm not mad about anybody. I'm mad at myself.
But even still, that probably didn't elicit the best performance from you.
No. I mean, there's times where that's what pulls it out. And she may be like I was. I was never I enjoyed practice, and I practiced because I love a process, and I always use my practice as like
for those of you who
meditation.
Haven't been paying attention to John Dudley. He is a professional archer, one of the best coaches in the world as well. And so what we're talking about now is archery.
Yeah, I'm relating to my field of expertise of shooting a bow and all that stuff. But I always, when I practiced, I like to get in a zone. I almost use it as like a form of meditation because it was so repetitive and systematic that I would do that. But a lot of times I would, even though I would be in a zone of practice, I wouldn't actually practice at a level that I would shoot during tournaments. There was a lot of times where my highest scores ever on field rounds have all came from national championships or world championships, because when you all of a sudden throw yourself in an element where everyone around you is capable of never missing as well, you have to dig down and pull that out of yourself, and it forces you to perform better. So I mean, that could
that's why so many you see so many world records being set at the Olympics.
Oh yeah.
Because
we just had one in archery too.
Yeah, amazing. Because when that type of pressure for the right type of person will bring out the best performance. It'll elicit the flow state. I mean, if you look at the classic things required to create flow state,
yep.
One of them is the stakes have to be high.
Mm-hmm.
It has to matter.
Yeah.
Really to get in the best form of flow state. And I think that's why you see these amazing performances. And you also see the other side. You see people, crumbling under that kind of pressure. Whatever, either bad luck or something inside they hadn't reconciled, some demon they hadn't faced, some fear they hadn't chased. Something comes up to the surface from that pressure that they hadn't yet dealt with, and it'll blow you up.
Well, yeah, I know in those situations where even the element, the environment, you almost psych yourself out of the game, whereas a good team and a good coach, they'll actually prepare and put their athletes in those type of environments. I believe, like, for example, in Korea, the Korean men won gold in archery, and the women have a chance to win gold, silver, bronze in archery. And Korea's always been very
North
very,
or south?
South.
I don't know. I saw some North Korean divers, and it was just weird for me to see North Korean athletes. I just feel like some coach. I like looked at their coach, like the coach was going to be an asshole. You know? I was just like a random assumption I made, just because it feels like it's like very like pressure driven, you know.
Well,
but I don't know. I have no idea.
A lot
I have no
of
idea
those
about the
other
North Korean
countries,
program.
from what I hear, if they don't, like, if they're expected to medal and they don't, it gets
gets squirrely.
pretty bad back home.
Right.
I think if you're from North Korea and you go, like, you better be finding out a different way to get home or stay in Brazil. If you go down there and underperform, I wouldn't want to be on that flight back.
Yeah.
And I think that coaching job, I mean, imagine being the coach. Like,
I know,
wait,
both,
we didn't
everybody.
win a medal? Yeah, I wouldn't want that job. He's got more pressure than they do, probably.
Probably. Who knows? Yeah, so anyway, South Korea has some chances.
They're super dominant. They always have been in archery, but what they do is they actually have environments where they throw their athletes in stadiums, fill them with people, and literally create like intense amount of, you know, sensations that they're going to feel during that Olympic environment. And they also notoriously, like at World Championships, they're always, you know, renting out enough rooms to where their athletes aren't getting infringed upon. They bring in their own cooks. You know, it's a very
bop for everybody on the South Korean floor.
Yeah, they keep them very much in line with what they do every single day. And I think with anyone that's expecting a lot out of their body, that's super important. And I mean, that's why for me, supplements and daily routine is, I mean, I feed off that, and it's hard when you travel to find something that allows you to do that, you know, just kind of stay on your routine. And actually, today when we were filling out some things, someone asked me what I liked best, and I love the TPC packs because for me, that's part of my routine. The one in the morning and the one at night is, you know, and even if I go somewhere where the food's sketchy, I feel like I can eat minimally and then still have a very important part of my routine that's like established at the front and back of it. Yeah. And I just feel like I can wake up, and even if I have a cup of coffee in that pack, and even if all I can find is a really good whole grain toast, I can almost sustain on that to like get me kick started. Yeah. And then for the evening, the night pack with the new mood has like totally changed my life.
Awesome, man.
I told you that because I don't have it on me actually right now, but I've got one of my little Fitbit bands, or it's actually a UA band. And for the first time ever, I had it tell me that I slept 8 hours and 7 minutes.
That's amazing.
Normally I'm about a 4-hour sleeper.
Yeah.
But ever since I started taking that night pack, and then Joe said, you know, took 2 or 3 new moods with it. I mean, I'm like having awesome dreams, and I'm just in la la land.
That's
man.
Killer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yesterday I was really just running around and preparing everything. It was a weigh-in night. We had a video we were launching. It was a crazy day. We were shooting some archery. I didn't really get to eat except for like a quick few bites here and there, but I sustained myself throughout the day. Emulsified MCT oil, Alpha Brain, you know, minerals, and actually I had like plenty of energy. I mean, in some ways I almost felt better than I know that I couldn't do that like multiple days in a row, but there's something about just very minimal eating, but supplying yourself with those key nutrients. Like sometimes when I fast fully and I don't have the fats, I feel like my brain slows down and my body like really down regulates, but a little bit of the Alpha Brain, a little bit of the emulsified MCT. I just put it in my water, you know, some Himalayan salt, some fulvic minerals, and I was like moving like all day, and I felt pretty good. So, you know, it's good to have those resources as backups when you don't have time. Like I just didn't have time for solid food really yesterday until after the weigh-in, and that really sustained me and kept me going.
I actually feel like I feel the same way. I've had times where I go to tournaments and I look at what there is for food, and I almost think I'm worse off like trying to eat something that maybe my body doesn't know how to process correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing with anyone who eats clean. When you eat clean and then you throw like junk in there, I mean,
You really feel it.
yeah, it's totally different than if you eat junky and then put something good in there. You know, if you put something good in there, it's like, whoa, okay, cool, this is thanks. You know? But if you go the other way, I mean, it's like your body's just like, like shut down mode. It's like,
You know, I think unfortunately some of that is the fact that when you're used to eating clean, you're aware how shitty other food is. So
Yeah.
your mind signals to your
yeah.
body. Your mind's like, hey, body, I just put poison in you. And your body's like, poison? Really? And then so it even exacerbates it. It's like the nocebo effect
Yeah.
of eating like McDonald's or something once
Yeah.
you've started eating clean.
yeah, it's the guiltiest eating ever.
Right.
If you eat clean, and then, you know, especially like I've got to the point now where I'm very, very, very minimal on sugars because I'm kind of almost at the point of like hypoglycemic.
Yeah.
So I'm like very sugar sensitive, and I'm also I really don't like chemicals, or especially like any type of chemical that's a coloring. I feel like I can taste it.
If anybody sees Dudley eating Starburst, call him the fuck out.
Literally,
If he's got a big king size Skittles, you slap that shit out of his hand and say, Dudley, I heard you on the TH show. Drop that shit.
I've never been much of a candy eater.
Yeah, me neither.
I actually, I was telling this story. We had some friends over, and we were talking about just kind of my personality, and Sharon was made me tell them this story about when I grew up. I really wanted a BB gun, but it was $40. It was one of the first like really good pump guns, Powerline 880. You remember that thing?
No, I don't remember that
You
thing.
don't? Well, it was $40, so my parents didn't want me to get a BB gun because I'd gotten a lot of trouble with other BB guns. So
Yeah, this sounds a lot like the Christmas story, but we'll continue with it.
yeah. I'm not going to go too deep on how bad it got. But what we did was they told me I had to buy the gun myself, so I needed to make $40. So it was 2 days before Halloween, so I got the idea. I ended up getting like multiple Halloween outfits. So I had my mom gave me her suitcase, so I would Halloween and I just trick or treat as fast as I could, get back home, change outfits, and do it again. And I filled up 3 big luggage like suitcases full of candies. And then the next day, I had a table out in front of the house, and I was just selling all the candy.
The next day, wouldn't you want to wait for supply to dry out? No, you just hit
back, I'm like thinking, those neighbors are like, look at this little freaking punk. Like,
selling all our candy.
we knew all our candy was going, but yeah. And then
That's
I was
hilarious.
selling it, so I ended up making all the kids.
You
that
would have
ran
held
of
out
candy.
like a week. Everybody would eat in the candy. They'd be going through sugar
Yeah,
withdrawals.
sales got better a few days in.
Yeah, for sure.
Sales got, but the thing is, I think a lot of people ran out because I mean, I hit it hard. Supply and demand on the streets.
So you kind of cornered the market just with your bigger. Oh, nice.
Yeah, I robbed the warehouse, and then
Nice
that was
job.
it. So
I like it. It was funny. Like I'll work with some of our higher profile athletes directly and talk to them about food and supplements and largely on the supplement side, but also how nutrition can support that. And I was talking to Donald Cerrone, and we're going through supplements. He's never been much of a supplement guy. Never really paid too much attention to any of that. And we're going through the supplements and started them really slow. And he started noticing like immediate impact, even just switching to Himalayan salt versus table salt. It's like feeling way better. Then taking the TPC, he's like sleeping better. He has more energy, feels more in touch with his body. So then we started progressing. And I was like, and hey man, probably like, 10 days out for the fight, you should kind of like slow down on the candy a little bit. And he's like, fuck that. He's like, fuck that. So I was like, all right, man, fucking keep the candy or whatever. He's like, work hard, play hard, live a life worth living. I was like, cool, man. Keep your candy. It's all good.
a Starburst tastes like a melted piece of candle in your mouth with like some flavor.
Yeah.
And it like sticks around for like you need to like grab your tongue with a napkin to like get that plastic off.
Yeah.
Is that like yellow number 6 or something?
Something bad. Depends on the flavor.
Yeah, I
Pinks
guess.
and reds and all that. Well, let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned process before. And I got a chance to work with you, and that's one of the things I love the most is having on it. I get exposed to some of the best, not only the best athletes, but the best coaches. And getting to work with you yesterday, shooting a bow, I got to see why you're one of the best coaches in the world, because you break it down to process and you build from fundamentals. And I think that's really something that applies to life. But let's talk a little bit about, how that not only applies to archery, but how you've used that kind of step-by-step process to, and other people can as well.
Well, a big part of why I'm here is because Joe really got me talked into. I like flexibility. I like full movement. I like, because archery is all about mind-muscle connection, and it's about an ability to maintain perfectly still while being able to manually work the most minimal muscles to go through your motion to fire without moving yourself off the target too. So he got me introduced to several of the processes, the steel mace and the kettlebells. So before I even really, I love the motions. It's simple, but I'm here because I want to learn the process, because I just know when it comes to efficiency, really on any sport, if you break things back down to the fundamentals, it seems like all sports are that way. You can watch pro football, and it's just like, oh, damn, why don't you tackle a guy? And it's like, you know what? Head down, shoulder across, wrap up. Right? It's the same thing. So that with archery, a lot of the really elite people that I work with, they want to be anonymous because they're in a slump and they don't really want to admit that they're struggling. But then when they come to me and they're like, okay, well, they just want me to watch them shoot. It's like, hold up. We're going.
You're going to pull that release right out of their hand, aren't you, John?
Yep. Yeah, you saw what happened yesterday to Ben.
Our friend Ben comes in, and he's got this nice, shiny silver release that apparently you'd already had some familiarity with it, which is why I called it the Tesseract.
Yeah.
Because you looked at that and immediately just swiped it from his hand and put it in your pocket. said, that's cute, Ben. I'm going to send that back to whoever gave it to you. That doesn't belong to you.
Yeah, exactly. I think, my basis of teaching is teaching someone one, I believe what makes a good student is them understanding why a coach is trying to talk about certain things. Yesterday I was a little bit difficult with you because you were like mentally, when I was talking to you, like today you're looking at me. Yesterday I could see you were thinking like, is the ring set up? Like when's the pre-fight thing? Or I wonder what kind of food they're serving. And so I remember I had to be like, yo, like, bring it in.
Right.
We got 30 minutes. Just bring it in, because I wanted you to see on the PowerPoint that I walked you through why I'm going to focus on these steps and how it builds you structurally so that you can learn how to execute a proper shot. And then once we went out, and you were actually worried about it being more difficult. You were like, I'm worried about when I get my bow that this is going to be harder for me to do. But then all of a sudden, the first time you did it, you're like,
oh,
that seems easier.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to efficiency. Form is everything. And utilizing bone structure, utilizing posture. And once you did that, everything was super easy for you to get back. And then, you finally got to where you were making the shot that I wanted you to make. But then towards the end, you were starting to know when you made a mistake,
right? Why?
And so for me, I really feel like as an athlete or as a coach, the coach, I don't think they should be there all the time. Like, because they're not like, no one's going to be with her in the ring today. Right?
Nope.
There's times where my coach could never come shoot with me on the line. So, but I think it's important that both of you know why, and then you're both there for each other for support on making sure that it's, because some people need to see it. Sometimes if you get really good at something, you can feel it, but other times people have to point out the small things. And ideally for me, that's what I'd love to get you built to where you understand all the basis of it, but then there just might be times where all of a sudden you slowly change something and you just might not recognize it. I can make an easy adjustment and then you're right back on track.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. And I think the way that you broke it down, you know, it makes it simple. You build from your feet, and then it's the way you hold the bow, and then it's how you hold your hand, and then it's, you know, both hands actually, how the hand grips the handle, and then how the other hand is already loaded to where you're going to draw back to the draw position. And it's remembering to, on the release we have, hold down the safety, and then you pull it back, and then it's the nose to the string, and then it's the elbow, making sure that the elbow's up, which should already be up from the pullback, and then pulling, you know, just pulling straight through with, you know, with your scapula rather than trying to muscle it with your lat or anything like that.
Because you, like for you, relating to the archery, you were so used to, you were drawing more with like a delt and bicep and like the main part of your lat, and I think because once we started to change that and I was having to move that elbow up, it was transferring load to a different muscle group that you really hadn't connected to for this type of technique yet.
Right.
So, you know, once you started to really realize where that was, then your best shots were the easiest to make. And I told you, I said, ideally what we're going to strive for is a good shot. You're going to be like, whoa, that went quick. Because if everything's flowing right, you should be efficient in something.
Yeah.
It's like difficult shots are very hard to do because you're having to waste a lot of energy and extra movement to make it happen. And I assume it's the same with, you know, like I hear Joe a lot of times because I'm next to him, he talks about like inefficiency of like strikes or inefficiency of how someone kicks. And they have all this freaking ungodly power, but yet someone of a smaller stature can generate way more energy, and it's because of efficiency and physics. You know, they're transferring and delivering at a much better rate.
And the timing of the strike, like how the bones stack when you hit. You know, that's even from my sparring days. There's certain people. It doesn't matter their size. You know, that matters a lot more for like wrestling or if you're like holding them. Then usually if they're huge, then they're strong. You know, but not even always. You know, there's some people who are incredibly strong. Like I remember we had a kettlebell instructor from a different school who's awesome, great guy, Ken Blackburn. He's a big on it guy, and his son Mitch was one of the record holders for kettlebells, and the kid was like slender, like 5'10", you know, 160 pounds. And could just grab the 28 kilos and go just 10 minutes doing long cycle, just whereas like the strongest person I know, all beefed out, would fade in 30 seconds of doing those. But it's just efficiency and the way his body was moving, the levers he was using, and how everything was stacked. You know, every part from his rack to his extension to everything had perfect efficiency. And that kid was strong as shit. Yeah,
and having overall less mass and being efficient, he's moving the weight with leverage and efficiency. Whereas a lot of people that are bigger, they're muscling the weight, and the more muscle you have, the more lactic acid you're producing, and you just start to shut down. I talked about this with Joe. We were talking about I'm a big believer now in I get a lot of tension in my lats through my traps and delts because of obviously what I'm doing. And, you know, I've got to the point where I just like to grab a bar and just hang and just elongate. And I feel like just my overall body weight just helps me self-correct. But it's like I can hang next to someone smaller than me, and I'm just like, okay, my hands are like, I need to let go. Whereas you get someone that's like 150, and they can just hang there all the time. And Joe's like, how many silverbacks you see swinging in trees, dude? He said, you know, he's like, sometimes those beefy, bulkier things, like they're not meant for that type of longevity. They just have more muscle burning and producing lactic acid.
But when they charge and smash into each other, that mass helps.
Yeah, you know? Helps a lot. I actually wanted to do some math. It's pretty interesting with archery. You know, like if I'm shooting pretty solid, I'm probably shooting 300 arrows a day. So shooting at 70 pounds, 300 arrows a day. So, you know, I'm pulling just over 10 tons of weight in a practice session.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you know, a lot of weightlifter, you look at someone that goes in and does, you know, 3 or 4 sets of, you know, lat pulls or 3 or 4 sets of rows or something. And I think, you know, it's not like I'm that bulked out compared to how much force you're actually pulling, but you're pulling, when you learn to pull the correct way, you know, I think with anything, technique is the basis of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why you've taken to our Onnit training methods, is because so much of it is about the technique. Like every implement has the right way to do it and the inefficient way to do it. You know, like you'll see you work with ESIC, and we have a 25-pound mace, the quad mace with the wooden handle.
Yep.
And he can swing that thing. I've seen him swing it one-handed and a full swing behind his back. Like
I wouldn't doubt it.
I mean, it's a brutally hard thing to do, but he's so efficient with it.
Yep.
It's even hard to do the two-hand swings. And if you try to we could get the strongest guy and say, yeah, do 20 360s with this, and there's no way unless they had the skill and the efficiency in how to do it. And that's what it forces you to learn. It forces you to isolate your body, to learn about where the efficiencies are, even how you hold the kettlebell. You know,
absolutely.
Anchoring the kettlebell deep in your wrist so you can stack your wrist on top of your elbow bones, your radius ulna, everything stacks up to your upper arm bones so that when you extend and hold, you know, you can hold that extended in the air and everything is just stacked up. And then how your shoulder sits so it's not crowding your head and getting too high and wearing out your trap. Mm-hmm. You know, everything has the right form, how you load your hips, the angle of your pelvis. And you start to become aware of that. And then, like you said, then you can self-correct, you know, and then you realize like for me, one of the big challenges that I'll be working on over the next few years is pulling my head back, because I have a very kind of primate, head goes forward, arms go forward.
Well, you do that with archery too.
Yeah.
Like when you were pulling, you were wanting to go forward to the string, and I grabbed one of your cute little curlies up there and said,
"Don't ever grab my cute curlies. I got them lots of places.
As long as I stay above the shoulders, I'm cool with it. But I'm not going below the belt." that's just
but so that's like and just becoming aware and just, you know,
that
throughout the day
changes your spine, right?
Changes your spine, changes everything, changes the tension that's on my trap, changes the tension in the middle of my back, everything changes. And now as I'm advancing in age, you know, it's harder to just slough that off. More years patterning bad movement just creates further problems down the road. So
and the older we get, the more important posture is. You know, you want to, I talked to you about this yesterday. You can, you know, one thing that I learned is you can be small or you can stand tall. Your expansion is very important, and especially like with my sport, with archery, you know, it's easy to compress and be small, but you can also, you know, utilize your entire chest cavity and you can be big. And I was telling you, I'm like, okay, you know, you're going forward, you're tightening up, and then I talked with you about that, and I'm like, okay, expansion, which you understand, you know, a lot of the terms that I use, although I don't have a martial arts background, I think the reason why Joe likes working with me so much is because I relate a lot of the things and the techniques that I say are like a direct correlation with, you know, with proper form and different like katas and stuff with martial arts, because it's all like technique and flow and posture, and when that stuff changes, the little, you know, I have a saying, anytime you change anything, you've changed everything. Mm-hmm. Because it all, you know, it's all somehow related. You know, it's like that with our body and our diet too. Yep. I've had people that are just like, well, I can't, you know, I haven't been able to sleep forever, and it's like, or they say, you know, I've been coughing, I've pretty much been coughing for my whole life, and it's like, well, you know, sometimes it just might be the smallest change that's going to literally affect this huge picture. And really, for me, eating clean, once I started eating really clean, then I started really realizing how the smallest of things, adding, like for me, if I add certain dairy or a certain amount of dairy, just immediately, like my sinuses, my sinus abilities, just how my stomach reacts, my process time, like it changes really quick.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize that. Like your total gut health, I'm glad that people are finally starting to realize the importance of, your balance within your stomach.
It's one of the most important things. 90% of your immune system, some studies say, is produced in the gut. Serotonin production comes from the gut. I mean, serotonin's involved in over 200 different reactions, many of which are relating to mood. So many things are happening in your gut that aren't even gut related. And that's not even talking about, preventing excessive pro-inflammatory cytokines, which comes from what's called like a leaky gut, where you're getting food particles out in your bloodstream, and then your immune system has to attack it and create inflammation because it thinks it's a foreign entity. And then you have systemic, inflammation, and those inflammatory cytokines cross the blood-brain barrier and get into your brain, and you get that brain fog and get super sleepy, and all of that's happening, but it's all related to your gut. Whereas if you're eating food that's really easy to digest and you have a healthy gut biome, you don't have that huge crash after a meal, and you don't need to take a nap or pound a jug of coffee, or you can if you want, but you'll feel a lot different. And so much is just related to the gut. That's the intake of all of our nutrients comes through that channel, and if you screw that up, you're gonna have problems.
Oh yeah. Now, are you keto?
No, I'm not. So I tend to be like, I just have a super fast metabolism to begin with.
Yep.
And if I start to go to keto, like I gotta balance that out. I'll just combust.
Keep up. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have to constantly be providing a varied resource of macronutrients. So the carbohydrates for me are pretty important, but I do eat a lot of fats. And it's super high fat, but I don't cut out the carbohydrate. I think, there's pretty good research that you can get both ketone energy and glycogen energy simultaneously. You don't need to go full keto and make that full switch, because there's like a point where the body will make a switch. It'll like click over and be like only relying on
I think I'm
ketones.
on a threshold. I think I'm like close, but I think between days where I want to have like lemonade, or maybe I want to, I want to eat a pizza or whatever, I kind of like wreck the whole thing. But I think I'm right on that threshold. I've never crossed over, but I feel like even though I haven't crossed over, my body craves fats way more than like carbs and things.
No doubt.
I mean, I could sit down and just wear out some avocados, like, and I've just got to the point now where we just figure out new ways. My wife makes, I don't eat bread too often. I might eat bread like twice a week, but she'll make some Ezekiel toast, and then she'll put like half an avocado on it, and just, one like sunny side up egg on there is really good.
That's a great way to start the day. I actually feel really good when I have sourdough toast. I think the fermentation of the dough process helps break down some of the harder to digest nutrients or anti-nutrients, whatever they may be, in the wheat. So if you are going to eat like a traditional bread, sourdough is generally thought to be better for you because it's fermented. That's what makes it sour. And I've found that from my own personal experience that I feel pretty good on like a nice, strong sourdough toast. There's some sourdough toast, it's like, I think it's just like a label thing. Like I'm not sure it's actually has that kind of bite that you get from a good sourdough.
You can taste it.
You can taste it. And so for me, that's one of my favorite things in the morning is, sourdough toast with avocado spread, which is like avocado, a little bit of lime, cayenne, Himalayan salt, and then some eggs over medium, and it's just, damn, it's
so
good.
Hungry.
I know, right? I'm just driving myself crazy thinking about that, but that's like one of my favorite breakfasts.
You're probably not the right one to ask, because if your metabolism's so high, see, I have days where I know that I'm supposed to maintain my size, because, for those people who haven't seen me in person, a lot of my people that see me on my social media, they don't realize I'm 6'5", 230. You know,
Yeah.
I just don't think I look that size. But I need to eat, according to like all my nutritionalists, I need to eat 5 times a day, a lot. But I'm the type of person where I actually feel like I'm forcing myself to eat like that. And a lot of times I really like to work out in the mornings, but I almost feel like if I get up, I can have like, you know, a TPC day pack. I can have like 2 or 3 Shroom Techs, and then I'll mix like an Alpha Brain, and I can totally do my whole morning workout with that. And then I almost like to not do anything for about an hour and then have my breakfast.
Yeah.
Like I don't, how do you feel about waking up and just, you know, some people feel like you have to wake up and you need to eat to like kickstart everything. I feel like I feel like I need time to let everything wake up. I feel like my workouts, there's times where I feel like I'm low on energy, so I might have some type of a good carb before a workout, but I don't feel like I work out as efficiently if I've eaten prior.
For me, I think it really depends. Everybody's physiology is different, and I think it's awesome that you're listening and in tune with your body. And so it's hard to say what you should do, but there's clear things that you shouldn't do. And the idea that you should pack your breakfast full of sugar is probably the worst idea anyone's ever had. You know, I mean, you look at the traditional breakfast, and it has so many sugary things. It's either maple syrup or fucking cereal. The cereal is the most ridiculous thing. And then people who have like the cereal, you have like homogenized pasteurized milk with sugar and grain, and then a reconstituted orange juice, which is more sugar, and that's breakfast. What is your insulin system going to do after that?
That'd have to be hitting over
100 grams of sugar.
Yeah, easily.
Yeah. And then, you know, maybe you throw up some pancakes with some syrup on there. Like, you know, and people are starting themselves with this massive insulin spike. And they've shown that these blood sugar spikes are terrible for the immune system. They throw everything out of whack. So your body right from the start is compensating for this massive sugar spike off the start of the day. And then they'll jam themselves with some caffeine too. So then you're compensating for this caffeine spike that's going to hit you really quick because it has no fats to deliver through there, and it's just a disaster. So don't do that. That's what I can say for sure.
Your body can't, you know, if you have a rise in your, you know, as soon as you rise your sugar and your body dumps the insulin in, you know, it's not like it starts to rise and boom, it hits and then it's able to do this.
No.
It's like this, and then it's like, holy crap, so it almost super dumps, and then it goes way down, and then before it can balance again, someone's hitting a Monster drink, you know what I mean, or a Red Bull, and it's like it, you know, it goes past that point again, and then it's the same thing. And that's why it's like people have trouble. I remember being at work, and it's like 10 o'clock, people are just like heads on the desk, but 2 to 3 o'clock, it's like, you know, people are struggling, and it's that chart.
Yeah, it's so many negative aspects, from diabetes to all these things, comes from these massive swings that we do instead of just leveling things out. And one of the things that's so great about fats is it tends to smooth that curve a lot more than eating high carbohydrate and high sugar foods. So, you know, moderating that and having lots of fats and proteins, that's one of the beautiful parts of the keto diet. And I think why people feel so good is their blood sugar levels really start to stabilize. Yeah. Because what you're saying is absolutely right. It's not like this finite amount that just brings it back down to homeostasis, you know, and nothing's like that. Like, for example, when you drink alcohol. So alcohol is a GABA agonist, right? It creates more GABA in the brain, and that's what causes you to feel the effects of alcohol. That's what makes it fun. You have more GABA. Well, the counterpart of GABA, much like insulin is the counterpart of blood sugar, the counterpart of GABA is a neurotransmitter called glutamine. So as you're drinking alcohol, your body's like, damn, we got way too much GABA. We got to jack up the glutamine, you know? So when you go to sleep, you know, sometimes with the GABA high, it's easy to fall asleep if you're drunk. But it's really hard to stay asleep after you've been drinking. And that's because during that time, your body's actively fighting against the GABA, which is what's called the glutamine rebound. And glutamine is the opposite. It makes you feel anxious, makes you feel alert. and it makes you like want to wake up, makes it super hard to sleep. So 4 hours after, your glutamine is spiked.
I was gabbed and gluted last night.
Yeah, for sure.
I nailed a couple bottles of red wine with my good buddy, and
there you go.
That's it.
There you go.
Fell asleep perfect. 4 hours later, wake up.
All right. So
heart
that's
rate sitting at about 78.
That's the
Frickin'
glutamine
blood
rebound.
pressure squirting through my neck. That's it. I can feel it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're used to having controlled heart rate and controlled blood pressure, you start to realize that stuff, and that I really preach that when I work with some of the teams that I'm with, because how they eat and when they eat is so important. A lot of people make the mistake, and actually this weekend is the IBO World Championship for archery, and a lot of people go there. There's 2,000 shooters are there. A lot of amateurs go, and they're getting to see pros for the first time, and it's this big archery weekend, and people go there, and there's a cool event, so they want to shoot as much practice as they can, so they just shoot at the practice range till it's dark. And then 1,000 people are hitting the town trying to find places to eat. And I mean, I remember when I started making the mistakes of being outside of an Outback, waiting for your table. It's 10 o'clock at night. You go in there and you're with your buddies.
And
so
bloomin' onions are delicious.
Yeah, freaking someone's got a bloomin' onion on the table, and then the steak comes out, and then someone's like, next thing you know, it's 12 at night, and you've got 20 ounces of red meat, and you've got a bloomin' onion. And probably a few drinks.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to be shooting at 7 a.m.
And not to mention that, it's all the stuff they cooked it with.
Yeah.
All of the fats that they've overheated and turned to trans fats. All these vegetable oils and soy oil, whatever the fuck they're cooking with at the back of an Outback Steakhouse.
Here's a good story for you. One time, because the synthetic crap they put on the grill, it'll give me the shits. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that lubricates the
it'll
lubricate the grill.
All the pipes. So I remember I went it was an old country buffet, and it was in my town, and I said, "Hey," I said, "Do you not use like a butter, like a normal butter for the omelets?" And they said, "No, we use like a kind of like a synthetic oil." And I just said, "Oh,
Castrol."
Okay. Yeah, pretty much. So I said, "Okay, can you not do that?" So I got in the habit of asking. Well, about 2 weeks later, or I said, I go, "Well, can you not just use butter?" And they said, "Well, no, we don't use the butter anymore on the grill." And then I said, "Well, why?" And they go, "Well, the flies come to the butter," and they said the flies won't land, and the flies don't land in the synthetic oil. And they said, so we don't have to worry about flies in the kitchen. And I'm like, okay, if a fly won't eat it.
Right.
I'm like, so you realize a fly.
You know what that means, right?
A fly.
They eat shit.
Won't go in your kitchen.
They literally eat shit. Do you understand that? And they won't eat that oil. So what do you think about that? Yeah, it's like when you can drop a Twinkie outside and it'll just stay.
It's
like,
amazing how nature
knows
that
it's
stuff.
poison. Yeah.
Because we had a disease that it's called EHD. There's a disease. It's a parasite that actually embeds in the bank of ponds. And when there's drought years and the water line recesses, the little parasites when they hatch and they come out of the mud, and it's exposed and it's not underwater, when the whitetails drink, that'll get in their nose and they're dead in 2 days. It's called EHD. They literally get a fever and they literally die from the inside of a fever.
Yikes.
And I mean, they get super hot. They just end up spinning around, dying. A lot of them die in ponds. But what's crazy is crows, buzzards, and coyotes will not eat one. If it dies of that, like nature, I'm surprised by that. That a crow or a buzzard wouldn't eat it. It's like
we're just so mentally dominant that those things surprise us.
Yeah.
Like that we just don't.
So we just go to the store. Oh.
It's like so many times, and I've done it so many. I've gotten food poisoning so many times, like so many times.
Congratulations.
And it's like, shouldn't I be able to sniff that out? Like, but I don't, because my mind is my dominant perceptual device.
Yeah.
Like I don't use my nose for anything except maybe for dating. Like I definitely smell the girls I'm about to hook up with. That's like, and that's like the one area where it's like really potent for me still. But
Pheromones?
like, yeah, like if someone doesn't smell right to me, I'm out. Like just like and that's something that's always been there, right? And that's a very animalistic thing. That's why animals are always smelling each other, is to try and figure out that thing. And that's probably the only thing that's intact. I will sniff anyone's butt if they're hot.
Like a dog? Like if someone just walks in the room?
If there's a pretty girl, I will sniff the butt for sure. For sure, without hesitation. Usually that's a conversation that takes a little while to develop.
I was gonna say,
if you just go straight at it, it gets a little rapey.
Dangerous.
It gets a little rapey.
Yeah.
But so definitely don't do that. But but with food, I'm like an idiot. You know, I can't.
Yeah.
I sometimes you can smell when it's off, but I should, as a primate, be able to know if the beef I'm about to eat has gone rancid. And so many times I've proven that not to be the case, and I think it's just because our minds are so dominant.
I've never thought of it that way. We've totally lost the ability to connect that way because we pretty much know that if chicken gets left out half the day.
Yeah, so we use our minds. We read dates. We analyze, like, how long has this been out? Well, based on the growth of the bacteria and the temperature that it's been in. Has it been in the freezer or has it been in the thing? Oh, this meat has been in the deep freeze for 2 years, probably still okay. 3 years, not okay. But it's not like we can just pull it out like the coyotes and the crows and the buzzards and be like, is this thing still good? We don't trust that anymore. We don't trust our instincts like that.
That's super interesting. I never thought of it that way. Yesterday when I was learning that steel mace, it was he was like going through the motions, and it seems like it's something that if you really did the right way, you could, even a kettlebell swing, if you picked one movement and kept it really light, I really think you could almost get into a zone state. Like for him, when I was watching him swing, and then when I started doing it, this might sound weird, but I was going to tell him today, my wedding ring on the mace, when I was going through the motions, it was a lot like, when I've got my meditative balls when I roll them, and if you get it right, they'll hum. And when I was like doing that right, it was that noise that kind of just, for me, puts you in a point where you're not necessarily thinking about the workout. You're kind of getting into for me, I just always love making my workout a time where mentally I'm able to step away from things. Yeah. Heavy weights are when I'm stressed. I try to break it out, but there's also times where my workouts for me have always been about mind-muscle connection and slow negatives.
A reprieve of thought.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So the best kettlebell competitors call it zombieing out. That's the terminology they use.
That's a real
which
thing?
Is just where, so it's where you almost see their face like lose all muscle control, and they're just,
yeah, I want to do that.
And they call it zombieing out, and because they got a 10-minute long cycle, so they're just dropping all thought function, anything that doesn't need to move doesn't move, and that includes their face. So they, like zombies are always like their face muscles don't have any power.
A real zombie, but
yeah. I don't know where you've been, bro. The zombies everywhere, but yeah, I don't know why they do that. I don't know why zombies can run super fast, but they can't like move their face. But anyways, that's like the metaphor that they use is just to drop everything, their mind, their eyelids, everything gets droopy, and they're just and just going in that mode. And I found that to be really useful for a lot of these long cycles, because we have these tests, like 24 different tests with all our different implements, and some of them go from 1 minute to 5 minutes. I think 5 minutes is the longest one, and it just gets grueling because you're trying to test work output. What's your weight and how many reps you can do, and that seems overwhelmingly the best method. Yep. It's not yelling and rah. Occasionally I'll give like a roar at the final 5 seconds, but like most of the time it's just get in that dead zone where you're just dead. And that's what Joe talks about playing pool. You get dead stroke, he calls it, and it's just dead stroke is just where there's no thought, and all it is you're like a machine, just tunk, tunk. And I'm sure it's the same with archery.
It's exactly the same. Very much the same. And I think See, I said this on Joe's podcast when I was on there. I feel like I got into that zone a lot with archery, and it was good because I could zone out and, just really get into just striking, and timing, and just, I could literally get in the zone and just start putting arrows right behind one another. But then there's also times where you're zoned out like that, and you might, I'd move to the next target and forget to move my sight because you're so out of it. So in some ways it was good, and I always feel like for me, because I try to get to that state during my workouts, I feel like I can get there easier during my performances.
Mm-hmm.
I think people that don't try to do that during their practice or don't focus on meditation. Like one thing I learned from Frank Zane, the first time that him and I worked together, is he wanted me to just start meditating. And I was like, dude, this is kind of like going beyond archery. I don't think I need it. And he's like, no, this was really important to my bodybuilding days because, you have to be able to do that. And, and he said, you have to be able to learn to do it to get into that zone fast. Yeah. And he would try to get into that zone while posing. And if you practice it, you can find that state much more often during a performance, because you're not always going to find it, but I think you're way more likely to find it.
No doubt. Anything is like that, the more that you can groove these patterns, even meditative patterns. Like if you get good at meditating, then you don't need to meditate to get in that state of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some meditation forms where you'll do basically like you'll embed triggers.
Right.
Like there's this one meditation that I do called the Sacred Silence Meditation, and there's a certain breath where you breathe in and you hold your breath until your heart rate, until you can feel your pulse pounding in your chest. And that's what you do at the end of the meditation only. And you do that at the end of the meditation, and when you're in such a heightened state, well, actually decreased as far as brainwave patterns, when you're got from beta on down to that alpha, maybe even theta range, you're really deep in, and you pattern that trigger breath. Well, over time, then you can use that trigger breath to manipulate your brainwave patterns as well. It's almost like a Pavlovian response. You
right.
Identified that breath with a certain brainwave state, so that when you need to meditate the most, when things are flustered and you're flustered and you can't go back to your cushion and light your incense and put on the candles and your special music, you got to get zenned out now.
Yeah.
So having a tool in your arsenal like that trigger breath is really, really valuable.
It's critical too, for depending on your sport. There's certain sports where you are avoiding a fight or flight trigger.
Yeah.
Like you're avoiding an adrenaline dump, you're avoiding accelerated heart rate, and your conscious mind normally it always has to trigger that, right? It's got to trigger that. You have to think about something that's causing that reaction. But then if you do it, like for example, I was telling you yesterday, there were times where I was in a tournament and I was just coasting. I was in the zone, but then someone will pull you out and say, all right, dude, 3 more arrows in the 10, it's a world record.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? And then, well, you're 3 away from a world record, dude. These 3, you got it. And then all of a sudden you trigger that fight or flight. So the key is to be able to have those triggers to then try to self-correct as fast as possible. Sometimes in a tournament situation you don't have the time, but figuring out a way to try to practice these means for those of listeners that are into sport, and they're worried about especially performance during event performance, all this stuff really factors in. I mean, sometimes people like, whoa, it's too deep. I thought that too the first time I was told it, but I can tell you that I can certainly credit it to a lot of my success being able to figure out triggers to be able to reset that.
Yep, no doubt. And I actually learned one from a track coach who's taught some of the fastest people in the world, and his specialty is improvement of start times. And he has a lot of physical and technical skills to get his sprinters out of the starting block faster. But one of the main triggers he does is how to get their mind in a state where their mind is empty and can react to that gunshot as fast as possible, because that's the biggest thing. It's how you receive that impulse.
Travel through fog, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so his trigger is he has his athletes say 2 words. He has them say, "I am." And for him, that's the trigger of being locked in the present moment. And I've used that with some of the athletes that I've worked with. And it's just kind of like open-ended acknowledgement of, like, I am, I'm here, you know, and that's what the trigger that he's used. So, and when they're in there, all of them will mutter that under their breath. I am. And then their mind's clear, and then boom, they can react. And so whatever you do, I mean, we're talking about high-level athletes, but that's important in anything. All of us have a certain point where we have a presentation to give or some type of situation where the stakes are raised.
It's performance anxiety, correct? I mean,
yeah, totally.
And performance can be a million different things.
No doubt. No doubt.
I had I don't have it on anymore because when I had my shoulder done, they actually cut it off me in surgery, but I used to have a bracelet, and it was made with pieces of arrows from arrows that I had won matches in. So it was just like all the different arrows from medals that I had won, and I had one space in it. So if I ever got triggered to where I was on a line, people didn't know I was doing it, but if I ever got triggered to where I was nervous and I could feel adrenaline, I could feel that I was starting to get tight, then a lot of times I'd look down and I'd just be spinning them, same as as working on a mantra, right?
Yeah.
And I would just spin them and spin them and spin them and just work them around. And for me, if I did it for about 30 seconds, I could normally reset, and then as soon as I could feel everything going away, I would go right into my shot process: stance, grip,
awesome.
Shoulder, anchor, peep, pull, fire. It would be one of those things. And I think if you can find that, if you're an athlete and you can get into that zone at some way or another, you're gonna find your best performances there.
Well, let's hope Whitney finds that tonight. Absolutely. Well, I'm sure we could go on for another couple hours, but
I could
hit our time.
Yeah, Joe tests your he's got my bladder like on the 3 hour
on the 3 hour plan.
Yeah.
How can people find you on social media? Where should they look you up?
So it's Nock On TV, NOCK TV. That's it. You can go to social media, NOCKON TV.
Beautiful.
No K. Some people do the knock.
Like you're knocking on
fighter.
the door.
I knock on the string. I don't knock on heads. So, yep. You can find me there, or John Dudley. You can Google it. Google will get you there. So
use the Google. Well, all of you listening, you know the outcome of Whitney's fight. I'm jealous of you right now. But
don't stress.
I won't. It gets easier the closer it gets up to me. For me, actually, like leading up, I'll probably there'll be some anxiety when it's actually happening, but we'll be there. It'll actually be happening. So that's always the release. So the closer it gets, those nerves turn to excitement, turns to just this feeling of readiness. So
yeah, well,
I'm
thanks
excited.
for inviting me to the academy. I'm just telling
Absolutely.
you, I'm here for the On It Academy, and this place is an unbelievable dojo, man. Such a cool vibe. It's like a technique mecca. I'm just geeking out here.
That's awesome. Well,
just seeing all the tools, and I'm ready to sling a bunch of raw steel around, man.
It's an honor to have you out here, brother. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Much love. Peace.